Hwang In Yeop's story is powerful because on paper, he was never supposed to become this unforgettable. Born on January 19, 1991, he entered entertainment later than many stars and began not as a major actor, but as a model before slowly moving into screen work. He debuted in the web series Why in 2018, then kept building through projects like The Tale of Nokdu, 18 Again, True Beauty, The Sound of Magic, Why Her, and Family by Choice. For years, nothing about his path looked easy, immediate, or guaranteed. He was not introduced to the public as the obvious golden boy. He was not the industry's most carefully packaged fantasy from the beginning. In many ways, he looked like someone who arrived too late. And maybe that is exactly why he hit so hard. Because Hwang In Yeop does not feel like a star who was handed the story. He feels like the star who stole it. Tall, sharp, distant, emotionally bruised, and strangely magnetic, he built his image not through softness or easy charm, but through ache, through silence, through the dangerous charisma of someone who looks like he already knows how disappointment feels. That is why audiences did not just notice him, they projected onto him. And once that started, he became one of the rare actors who could make viewers want the man who was never even supposed to be the ending. Before Hwang In Yeop became the kind of actor audiences projected heartbreak onto, he was already living a life that did not move in the usual straight line of celebrity ambition. He was born on January 19, 1991, in Uijeongbu, Gyeonggi Province, but a major part of his youth unfolded far from the Korean entertainment system that would later make him famous. Public profiles note that he lived in Davao City in the Philippines during his high school and college years, used the English name Ryan Leon, studied at Philippine Nikki Jinkai International School, and later earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Fashion Design from Philippine Women's University. That matters more than it seems, because Hwang In Yeop's image has never felt like that of a boy who grew up moving naturally towards stardom. He feels like someone who came from elsewhere, not just geographically, but emotionally. There is something about him that always carries a slight delay, a sense of arriving after the moment should have already passed. And maybe that is why his screen presence feels so charged. He does not look like a star who was born inside the machine. He looks like a man who stepped into it late, already carrying a different kind of loneliness. That late start is one of the most important things about him. Public career summaries note that he only entered the entertainment industry in 2017 as a runway model before making his acting debut in the web drama Why in 2018. In an industry obsessed with youth and speed, that is not the most comfortable timeline. He was not a teenage trainee carefully raised for fame. He was already older than many rookies when his career truly began, and that is exactly why his rise feels more seductive. Because when someone arrives late, every success carries a shadow behind it, the sense that time has already been lost, that opportunities cannot be wasted, that every role has to hit harder because there is less illusion of endless chances. Hwang In Yeop's entire aura seems shaped by that pressure. He does not radiate innocence. He radiates someone who already knows what it means to be slightly out of step with the world and still keep moving. Even details from his personal history deepen that impression. Public profiles note that he had already completed his mandatory military service before beginning his modeling career, and that he trained in martial arts including Taekwondo, Hapkido, and Kendo Kumdo. Those details do not make him famous by themselves, but they reinforce the same feeling: discipline, delay, and a body trained to carry control before fame ever arrived. And maybe that is the hidden foundation of Hwang In Yeop's appeal. He did not enter showbiz with the softness of someone still waiting to be formed. He entered already sharpened by distance, lateness, and the quiet fear of having started too late to be ignored. Hwang In Yeop's real breakthrough did not happen when the industry officially handed him the spotlight. It happened when the audience stole it for him. That is what made his rise so explosive. After beginning as a runway model in 2017 and making his screen debut with the web series Y in 2018, Hwang In Yeop slowly built recognition through The Tale of Nokdu in 2019 and 18 again in 2020. But then something much more dangerous happened. He entered True Beauty as Han Seo-jun, the second male lead who was never supposed to win the story, and ended up becoming the emotional center of the audience's obsession anyway. That role did not just make him popular, it made him unforgettable. Because Hwang In Yeop was not playing a safe fantasy, he was playing ache. Seo-jun was wounded, cool, sharp, emotionally hidden, loyal in a way that hurt, and rebellious in exactly the way romance audiences find impossible to resist. But what made the performance truly lethal was that Hwang In Yeop did not ask to be loved. He looked like someone already used to disappointment. That changed everything. Instead of presenting himself as the obvious dream, he became the man viewers wanted to save, understand, and choose, even when the script had already decided otherwise. That is a much stronger kind of emotional hook than simple charm. It turns attraction into frustration, and frustration into obsession. This is where his image became something unique in Korean drama. Most male stars are introduced to the public as either the sweet hero, the polished fantasy, or the dangerous mystery. Hwang In Yeop landed somewhere far more addictive, the emotionally bruised outsider who looked like he could love harder than the man who was supposed to get the girl. That is why his fame after True Beauty did not feel ordinary. It felt like collective emotional rebellion. Audiences were no longer just admiring him. They were arguing for him, defending him, mourning him, projecting onto him so intensely that the second lead syndrome attached to his name became part of his brand. And once that happened, the rules of his career changed. He was no longer the late starter quietly building a resume. He was the man who had hijacked the audience's heart without technically being the ending. That kind of fame is thrilling, but it is also dangerous. Because once viewers love you for the pain of not being chosen, every next role carries a brutal question. Can you still hold them when you are finally the one at the center? That was the challenge waiting for Hwang In Yeop after True Beauty. Not how to get attention anymore, but how to survive becoming the actor people wanted so badly that they were willing to rewrite the emotional logic of the whole story for him. The cruelest thing about Hwang In Yeop's breakthrough is this. Once the audience finally chose him, they chose him for the pain of not being chosen. That is a beautiful kind of fame, and also a dangerous one. After True Beauty, Hwang In Yeop was no longer just the late starter with a striking face and unexpectedly deep emotional pull. He had become a public wound, a fantasy built not on comfort, but on loss. Viewers did not simply like him, they ached for him. And once a star becomes loved through heartbreak, the next phase of his career becomes brutally difficult. Because now the audience is no longer asking, can he act? They are asking something much harder. Can he make me feel that much again when he is finally the one in the center? That is the pressure Hwang In Yeop had to carry into the years that followed. He moved into bigger, more central projects, like The Sound of Magic and Why Her in 2022, then later Family by Choice in 2024, where he played Kim San-ha, one of the main leads. On paper, this looks like the natural progression of a rising actor. Supporting scene stealer becomes leading man. But emotionally, it is more complicated than that. Because when the public first falls for you as the outsider, the bruised one, the almost ending, they attach to a very specific feeling. And the truth is, center stage love is harder to make painful, harder to make dangerous, harder to make unforgettable in exactly the same way. So Hwang In Yeop had to do something more difficult than simply succeed. He had to evolve without losing the ache that made him addictive. That is what makes his image so unusual. He does not have the easy polish of a star who was always meant to be first choice. Even as a lead, he still carries the emotional residue of someone who arrived late, watched from the edges, and learned how to make distance feel intimate. That quality helped him stay compelling in The Sound of Magic, where his character already carried emotional pressure, and in Why Her, where he moved through a darker, more wounded dramatic space. Then in Family by Choice, he stepped into a role that leaned more fully into emotional centrality, asking the audience not just to sympathize with him from the sidelines, but to stay with him at the front of the story. And this is where his career becomes genuinely interesting, because success did not make Hwang In Yeop safer. It made him more exposed. As a supporting obsession, he had the freedom of surprise. As a lead, he had the burden of expectation. People no longer wanted only his face, his sadness, or his second lead intensity. They wanted proof that the man they had emotionally chosen in defiance of the script could now carry a whole world on his own. That is not just career pressure. That is emotional debt to the audience. And very few actors survive that transition without losing some of what made them magnetic in the first place. Maybe that is why Hwang In Yeop remains so compelling even after becoming a lead. He still does not feel fully settled inside stardom. He still feels like a man carrying the memory of being overlooked, and that memory gives his success a tension most stars lose once they finally arrive. The most dangerous thing about Hwang In Yeop's fame is that people did not just fall for his face, they fell for his pain. And once that happens, a star's image becomes much harder to escape. Because audiences were not drawn to Hwang In Yeop in the simple way they are drawn to many handsome actors. They were drawn to the emotional tension he carried, the feeling that behind the sharp jawline, the rebellious styling, and the cool restraint, there was always some private wound making him more human than the fantasy itself. That is what made him so addictive in True Beauty, and that same energy kept shaping how people looked at him afterward. He was not merely desired. He was desired through sadness. That creates a very specific trap. When the public loves an actor for the ache he brings into a frame, they begin expecting that ache to stay available. They want the same emotional bruise, the same beautiful loneliness, the same sense that he could love harder than everyone else and still somehow end up losing. It becomes less about the actor's full range and more about preserving the feeling audiences first became obsessed with. In other words, the pain becomes part of the brand. That is a heavy thing to carry. Because if Hwang In Yeop keeps leaning into wounded, emotionally guarded, almost unreachable men, he risks becoming trapped inside the very image that made him famous. But if he moves too far away from it, something else happens. The audience may feel the loss of the fantasy they projected onto him. They may still admire him, still support him, still watch him. But that obsessive attachment, the one built on longing and second-lead heartbreak, becomes harder to recreate. This is the hidden psychological pressure in his career. He is not only trying to choose good roles, he is trying to manage projection. Projection from viewers who want him to remain the outsider. Projection from fans who still carry the emotional aftertaste of Han Seo-jun. Projection from an industry that now understands exactly what kind of magnetism he can sell. And that means Hwang In Yeop's real challenge is much deeper than finding the next hit drama. It is figuring out how to grow without losing the emotional distortion that made people look at him differently in the first place. There is also something else that makes this harder. Hwang In Yeop's image feels personal to viewers in a way many actors' images do not. He does not come across as coldly untouchable. He comes across as if he has already lived through disappointment. That makes audiences feel closer to him, but it also makes them more possessive. They do not just want him to succeed, they want him to remain emotionally recognizable to them, and maybe that is the quiet tragedy inside his popularity. Hwang In Yeop became a star because he could make not being chosen feel more romantic than winning. But in real life, a career cannot survive forever on emotional near misses. At some point, he has to become larger than the sadness people first loved in him. The real question now is whether he can do that without losing the exact wound that made him unforgettable. Today, Hwang In Yeop stands in one of the most emotionally unusual places in Korean entertainment. He is no longer just the late starter who entered the industry after modeling in 2017 and acting in 2018. He is no longer only the second lead audiences rebelled for in True Beauty, and he is no longer simply the actor whose sadness made people fall harder than they expected. He has become something more difficult to categorize, a star whose entire power comes from having arrived late, missed the obvious path, and still made himself unforgettable anyway. That is what makes his story feel different from ordinary success narratives. Hwang In Yeop did not rise through ease. He rose through delay, through emotional displacement, through the strange advantage of looking like a man who already understood disappointment before fame ever touched him. His years in the Philippines, his late industry start, and his gradual move from modeling to web dramas, then to 18. Again, True Beauty, The Sound of Magic, Why Her, and Family by Choice all gave his career attention many stars never develop. He does not feel manufactured for instant love. He feels earned, and maybe that is the final truth about Hwang In Yeop. He was never really built to be the obvious ending. He was built to linger longer than the ending itself. The face viewers remember after the drama is over. The man who made being overlooked feel more romantic than winning, and the actor who turned delay into the very thing that made him impossible to replace.